The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character. Brianna hit my baby during our Christmas meal. The crack of her hand against his skin sliced through the room. It was sharp enough that even the faint hum of the ring light seemed to pause. My little boy, Leo, let out a cry, but then he went strangely quiet. No one rushed to him. No one even turned their head. My sister didn't look down at him. My parents didn't either. All of them fixed their eyes on me instead. They were waiting. They expected the usual performance. They wanted the apology that always came from my mouth. They wanted me to shrink, to smooth everything over, to say I was overreacting. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stayed still. But someone else did. My husband, David, eased his chair back from the table. He did it carefully, deliberately. The kind of slow movement that shifts the temperature of a room before a single word is spoken. He held Brianna's gaze and said quietly and evenly, "Get out." I had already made my decision inside my own head. I didn't say it aloud, but it was there. I understood I was trading this single moment for the shape of the rest of my life. You can stay here and decide if I was right or wrong. I learned how to disappear long before I understood that word. When I was 9, I used to stand at the edge of my grandparents' dining room during Sunday dinners. There was an old wooden chair there with faded fabric on the seat. To everyone else, it was just extra furniture. To me, it was my place. I stood beside it like it was assigned. From that corner, I watched my sister Brianna. She was 11 then, louder than me. Brighter than me, it always felt like some invisible spotlight followed her wherever she went. She stood in the center of every family photo. My mom, Linda, would smooth down Brianna's hair and gently tilt up her chin. "They're perfect," she would say. If I stepped forward even slightly, my mother would press her palm lightly against my shoulder and guide me back. The smile she gave me looked sweet, but it was a warning. Let your sister shine. My dad, Robert, never interfered. He adjusted the camera lens. He focused on lighting. He acted like he didn't notice me returning to that worn-out chair. Like he couldn't hear the small scrape it made against the floor as I sat down again. That wasn't where the pattern began, but it's the first time I remember feeling it settle inside me. Once I brought home a certificate from school, an award I'd worked hard for. Brianna spilled juice across it. By accident, they said. The paper curled and bled with purple stains. Instead of asking if I was okay, Mom rushed to comfort Brianna. She didn't mean it, she insisted. You know how sensitive your sister is. Sensitive. I heard that word more than I heard my own name. It followed me through every room. If I asked a question at the wrong time, if I disagreed, if I simply existed inconveniently. Mom would lower her voice and say it like it was a diagnosis. Your sister is sensitive. Dad had his own phrase, don't make this bigger than it is. That sentence shadowed my childhood. It flattened everything, my feelings, my anger, my confusion. When we became teenagers, the gap between us stretched wider. If Brianna wanted concert tickets, I was told to hand over the babysitting money I'd saved. I was responsible. I was organized. As if those qualities belonged to the family more than they belonged to me. When I needed a ride home from school for a project, they forgot twice. The third time, Dad said, ask your sister. She had already gone out with friends. At 18, I thought adulthood would shift something. It didn't. At family dinners, Brianna's stories rolled across the table like a performance. If I tried to speak, someone interrupted. If I disagreed, tension snapped tight across the room. Mom would sigh and say, Sarah, you're reading too much into it. There it was again, my cue to quiet down. Years passed. I moved out. I built a life with routines that were mine. But the old reflex stayed inside me. Step back, stay gentle, keep the peace. I didn't realize how much that silence had cost until Leo was born. When my baby cried and Brianna snapped at me for being dramatic, something old shifted inside my chest. It felt like that wooden chair with the faded cushion, like it had cracked down the middle. It didn't collapse all at once, but it moved. I can trace the moment the pattern sealed itself. It was one of those nights with camera flashes popping. Mom turned toward me and said, Sarah, stop being so sensitive. That was the day I understood my place. After the Christmas dinner ended, the house settled into a heavy quiet, not peaceful. Just thick, I stood in the hallway rocking Leo. His breath moved steadily against my shoulder. The red imprint on his cheek had faded slightly but was still visible. Under the lamplight, it looked accusatory. Footsteps approached behind me, slow and confident. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Brianna. She stopped a short distance away, arms folded. Her voice carried that practiced calm she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. You made a big scene, she said. Then, honestly, Sarah, you're overreacting. Again, that word again reopened something old. I didn't answer. I adjusted Leo in my arms and pressed my palm gently against his back. His warmth grounded me. In my family, my silence usually meant surrender. It meant the argument was over because I had given up. She waited for it. When I didn't fold, she exhaled loudly, irritated. Mom agrees with me, she added. She told me Mom thought I was too emotional for anyone to take seriously. My throat tightened, but my face stayed still. I had practiced that skill for years. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. If I wanted the family to stay normal, she said, I needed to stop creating drama. I made them look bad. She said us like I was standing outside something they owned. The wallpaper behind me smelled faintly of cinnamon from the holiday candles. I could hear dishes clinking in the dining room. Laughter. Leo exhaled softly against my collarbone. Everything else felt thin and sharp. I looked at her then. I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I just saw it clearly. She blinked, confused by my stillness. You heard me right? She asked. I heard you, I said evenly. Something in her expression shifted. She didn't know what was different, only that I wasn't bending. When I walked away, she didn't follow. She didn't realize that the second she called me dramatic, the version of my life they had planned began to unravel. I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I simply stopped shrinking. That was the beginning of everything that followed. I left the house without anger. Leo rested against my chest, his breath warm through my sweater. The night air felt tight and cold. David walked slightly ahead of me, the diaper bag in his hand. His other hand hovered near my back, not touching, just present. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. At home, I laid Leo in his crib. His small fist opened and closed as he drifted to sleep. He didn't know about the fracture he had been part of. I watched his chest rise and fall. Then I stepped into the hallway, where the light was dimmer. My fingers found the bracelet around my wrist, tracing it the way I always did when I was thinking. Something inside me settled into place. I didn't cry. I didn't replay the sound of the slap. I acted. In the living room, the lamp cast a soft circle of light over the table. I set my phone down and opened a blank note. My thumb hovered for a moment, then I typed, December 25th, 7:15 p.m. Leo hit. I added specifics, where we were standing, the direction of the light, the distance from the table. The exact moment Leo stopped crying, the sentences appeared clean and precise, like cutting fabric in a straight line. After that, I opened my photos and found the image I had taken in the hallway. Leo's cheek, the red mark. I saved it in a folder labeled Leo Health Notes. I wasn't doing this out of anger. I was doing it for clarity. Then I opened the family group chat. I took screenshots of everything that mattered. My mother's sharp message from last month, Brianna's texts about filming her videos. I saved the message where Linda told me not to ruin the mood with my worries. I put every picture in its own folder with a label. After that, I opened the computer file I use for house planning. I made a new tab for a timeline. I made another one for what people saw. I made another one for the messages. My fingers moved faster as I built the structure. I sat on the couch with my legs under me. I pulled the blanket over the arm of the couch. The house was quiet except for the sound of the keyboard and the heater. David walked into the room. He stopped behind me and put a warm cup of tea next to my elbow. He didn't ask what I was doing. He saw the folders and the picture of Leo. He only said, "Take your time." Then he stepped back to give me space. I didn't need anyone to tell me it was okay. I needed things to be clear. I made a file for all the medical notes since Leo was born. I wrote down his temperatures, his visits to the doctor, and how he ate. I wasn't trying to use these as a weapon. I wanted to protect him. I wanted to show the truth without raising my voice. I wanted to build something solid so nobody could say I was overreacting. The clock on the wall went past midnight. I kept typing. I also looked through my folders for bills, checking receipts, and all the normal papers adults have to keep. I looked at the dates and compared them to things people said. I started to see patterns that I usually didn't pay attention to. It wasn't because they didn't matter, but because I was just used to ignoring them. These papers showed something very important. For many years, I was the one doing all the hard emotional work and all the planning for this family. All that time, I was treated like I was just a background character in my own life. I pulled the computer closer and made one last tab in the file. I simply called it recommendations. I wasn't being dramatic and I wasn't trying to be mean. It was just a list of steps for how to take care of Leo, how to set boundaries for talking, and how to stay safe. It was about the truth. Then I did the hardest part. I had to send the email. I wrote it very slowly and read every single word out loud in my mind. I wasn't accusing anyone of anything, and I wasn't making any threats. I was just writing down the facts. It was a neutral and steady message. I sent it to a legal expert I had talked to once before when I was having a hard time with my job after I had my baby. I attached all the folders, the timeline, and the pictures. My finger stayed over the send button for a moment. I let out one deep and quiet breath, and then I pushed it. The sound the computer made as the email left felt like a door shutting very softly. It wasn't a big show, but it felt final. David came back and leaned against the door frame. He asked, "You sure?" I told him. "Yes, I'm done being the only one who remembers what actually happened." I stood up and stretched my body. I felt the pain in my shoulders for the first time. The living room looked exactly the same as it always did, with the lamp, the couch, and the toy box, but the air felt different now. It was like I was standing in a room that had just been cleaned of something you couldn't see. I walked over to Leo's bed and put my hand on his back. I felt the steady rhythm of him breathing. His innocence felt heavier to me now. It wasn't because he needed to be hidden, but because I finally understood what it meant to really protect him. Being strong doesn't always mean you have to be loud. Sometimes you are strong when you write things down. Sometimes you are strong when you are quiet. As I stood there looking at my son, I knew one thing for certain. I was not going to be the person who fixed what they had broken this time. A few days later, we went back to the house. It looked different. It didn't feel warm or decorated. It just looked dark. The holiday lights in the window were blinking in a weird way, like they were tired of pretending everything was fine. We were there because my mother told us we had to have a family talk. She sounded very defensive on the phone. She didn't even ask me how Leo was doing. David carried Leo in his car seat and put it down gently near the door. I didn't take my coat off. The air inside still smelled like cinnamon and something metallic. The ring light from the Christmas dinner was on the floor and wasn't plugged in. Its legs were spread out like a piece of broken equipment. Brianna was already sitting at the table. Her arms were crossed, and she looked like she had practiced her expression. She looked like she was somewhere between being mad and being innocent. My mother stood behind her like she was trying to protect her from an accusation that hadn't been said yet. My father moved a chair, but he didn't sit down. He watched David with a worried look that I had never seen before. Linda started talking first. She said, "Sarah, we all think you misunderstood what happened." It was the same line I had heard for years. It was like a script. Before I could say anything, Brianna added, "You made everything worse by sending that email. You blindsided us." I looked at her and then I looked at the table. This was the same table where she had slapped my baby. It was the same table where everyone's silence was louder than his crying. David did not sit down. He put both of his hands on the back of a chair. I could see the muscles in his arms were tight, but he was in control. He said, "We're here so everyone can hear the truth." His voice was very level. Mom made a scoffing sound. She said, "The truth Sarah has always." She stopped talking when David stood up straight. He wasn't the kind of man who yelled, but he had a very strong presence. Right now, his presence made the whole room feel smaller. I reached into my bag and put a thin folder on the table. I wasn't being dramatic, it was just paper. It had the photos, the timelines, the messages, and the notes. Everything was clean, and it had no emotion in it. My father looked confused. He asked, "What is all this documentation?" I said very quietly, "Documentation since none of you looked at him that night." Brianna rolled her eyes. She said, "You're blowing this out of proportion." David cut in. His voice was calm but sharp. He said, "She slapped an infant." The words landed heavier than the folder. Silence spread through the room. I opened the first page. It was the photo of Leo's cheek, and you could see the faint mark under the hallway light. I said this was taken 10 minutes after dinner. I sent it to a pediatric specialist. Her assessment is attached. David cut her off. His voice wasn't loud, but it was very sharp. He said she slapped an infant. Those words made the whole room go completely silent. I opened the folder to the very first page. It was the photo of Leo's cheek. You could see the mark clearly under the hallway light. I told them this was taken 10 minutes after dinner. I sent it to a pediatric specialist. Her assessment is attached. My mother's face looked very tense. She said, "Sarah, you didn't have to escalate this." I looked at her and replied, "I didn't. The system did." I moved to the next page. It had my notes about the risks, the advice from the legal expert, and the proof that now existed outside of the family's control. I told them that this wasn't about trying to punish anyone. I said, "It's about protecting my child." Brianna pushed her chair back so hard it made a loud scraping noise. She said, "You're making me look like a monster." "No," I answered her. "I'm showing what happened." She stood up very fast and her eyes were flashing. She said, "You're pathetic, Sarah. You always need to feel like the victim." Before I could feel that old pain in my throat, David stepped forward. He was slow and steady. He said, "Enough." Brianna opened her mouth to keep fighting. David didn't give her a chance. He looked her straight in the eye, just like he did on the night of the slap. He said the words that were sharper than any anger. He said, "Get out." The room went still. My mother made a gasping sound. My father's jaw twitched. Brianna just stood there caught between being mad and not believing what was happening. David added, "You can leave. We will." The power in the room shifted so quietly. For the first time in my whole life, I watched my sister look around the room for someone to defend her, but she found nobody who would do it. She grabbed her purse and said something under her breath, but she wouldn't look at me. She avoided the folder and she avoided the truth. She walked out without looking back once. The door made a small clicking sound when it shut. It was a small noise, but it felt like a huge ending. I took a steady breath. My mother was the first one to speak and her voice was shaking. She asked, "Sarah, what happens now?" I closed the folder. I said, "Now the rest is in motion, and for once it's not my job to fix it." The house felt lighter after she left, even though the walls and the furniture were the same. The air didn't feel like I was waiting for someone else to tell me I was okay anymore. It felt like the silence had finally changed sides. We drove home and we didn't talk. Leo slept the whole way. His breath made a little bit of fog on the edge of his blanket. David kept one hand on the wheel and his other hand was near mine. He wasn't touching me, but he was just there. That is how quiet support feels. I watched the city go by through the window. Everything looked normal, but I didn't feel like my old self at all. When we got home, I took Leo into the backyard. The winter sun was low over the grass. It was soft and it didn't feel empty. I put him down near the patio. He pulled himself up using the legs of the wooden bench. He was wobbling, but he looked very determined. He laughed, and it was a small, bubbly sound. It was a sound that didn't have anything to do with what other people expected of him. I sat down next to him and let the moment stay there. For many years, I thought silence meant I was giving up. I had learned to step back and be soft so the family could stay together. But watching Leo try to stand up on his own, I understood something very simple that couldn't be changed. Silence only hurts when it belongs to someone else. When it belongs to you, it is something else entirely. It is a boundary and it is a beginning. The folder I had closed at my parents' house was sitting on the kitchen counter. Nobody called me and there were no frantic messages or apologies. There was just open space that wasn't cluttered. She never came back. I didn't feel bitter about it and I wasn't celebrating. It was just the truth. A clean line was drawn where there used to be chaos. A light wind moved through the yard and brushed Leo's hair. He moved his hands and took one small shaky step toward me. I held my hands out, but I didn't pull him toward me. I let him find his own balance. In that quiet time, something inside me finally let go. It was something I had been carrying since I was a child, and it was shaped like that wooden chair at the end of the table. For the first time, the silence felt like it was mine. The yard got quiet as the last light went behind the fence. Only the grass made a soft sound. Leo watched me with big eyes that didn't have any burdens. I breathed in the cold air and let it settle where my fear used to be. The past didn't just disappear, but it didn't control my life anymore. Families can break in loud ways, but they can also break in silence. Sometimes that silence is the very first honest sound you ever hear. Boundaries are not about getting revenge. They are the place where your life finally starts. If you have ever lived through a silence like this one, tell me what it taught you. Share the moment when everything changed for you. I am listening, and somewhere out there is someone who needs to hear your story, and they are listening too.